Hello and welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Lauren and today I am going to be watching a video by Abby Cox called The Odd Historical Origins of the Witch's Hat. I thought I would have some fun today. I'm dressed up a little bit. And this is my one and only witch hat. So we'll see if it works with my headphones on or not. If not, this is all you get. So I'll do some poses just in case. Hello. I hope you all enjoy. I'm looking forward to this. I've been having fun with some of these Halloween-y based videos. I'm really enjoying myself. I really hope you guys are too. And thank you to everyone who has given me continual suggestions or at least genre suggestions. I really do appreciate that. It does help me out, especially because I'm like, I don't know, I'll watch pretty much anything. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this video and I'm gonna check and see if these headphones are gonna actually work here. I mean, it's kind of silly. It feels a little bit like it's about to fall off my head. Anyway, also, this is a new setup. I'm not sure if you've noticed. This is my first video with this particular setup, so we'll see. We're going to be tweaking things and changing things and figuring things out. My roommate is currently playing piano, so if you can hear that, you're welcome, because it's gorgeous. She's very skilled. But yeah, that is it for my little intro. It's very long today, I'm sorry. But yeah, let's get into the odd historical origins of the witch's hat.
Hello everyone, I hope you all are having a wonderful spooky season. Today I want to take you all down a research rabbit hole that I've recently been on about a festive piece of spoopy millinery, the Black Witch Hat. In the United States, the tall, conical, flat-brimmed witch's hat is a staple in our Halloween decorations, as well as any imagery or products relating to anything witchy, spooky, or frankly, just a little bit gothy. However,
see, my understanding is that it was a similar type of hat worn by the brewers, like the beer brewers. Many of them were women, and this is the kind of hat that they wore, like in marketplaces and such, in order to, like, announce their craft, so you would know where you could get your beer.
However, I think most of us watching this video can agree that over the course of 2020, there has been an explosion of witchy aesthetic clothing and accessories, especially with the witch's hat. Whether you're young or old, the amount of people embracing their inner witch and rocking the witch hat thrills me to no end. Because while researching this video, I also, as a result, researched the history of witches, and it has left me with some very big fifis. And while I think there is something to be said for female identifying and non-binary folk embracing their inner witch in 2020, that's not what this video is about. Though I low-key would love Rowan Ellis to do a video on the rise of witches and witchcore and witch talk like she did with cottagecore, because I think she would be amazing at it. But
Right. Oh my God, I forgot about witch talk. Oh, that was so wild. Remember that? I don't know if that's still like a big thing that's happening, because I am almost never on TikTok these days. I still have one. I think I post something like every 6 months over there, so it's not even worth it. But like, and then I forget that I have it, and then like I watch videos and other like social media platforms that I see it's from TikTok, and I'm like, oh, I should go check that out over. And then, but witch talk, I remember seeing some stuff on about witch talk that was. It's always a little bit funny to me. I'm sorry.
Is like my total academic girl crush talking, so there we are. Today, it's all about the actual history of the witch hat. And no, I don't mean some crappy clickbaity nonsense. I mean actual, real, scholarly research on the subject. Let me tell you all, wow, did I fall down a massive rabbit hole.
Cool.
I've only been working on this for like 5 days straight, nonstop, for 12-hour days.
Wow.
If you have ever wanted to learn about 18th century dressmaking from the absolute best teacher ever, Then I have got some great news for you. Burnley and Trowbridge is launching an online 18th century mantua making course taught by the incredible Brooke Wellborn. And enrollment opens up October 19th, which is tomorrow, by the way. I cannot stress this enough. Brooke was the person who taught me about 18th century dressmaking.
This was a really long time ago, though, this particular event. Yeah, 3 years ago. So if you want to look up Burnley and Trowbridge Company, give that a look-see.
Stress that this video is not sponsored by Burnley and Trowbridge. When I heard the plans for the workshop, I just really got excited and I felt the need to kind of scream it from the rooftops because I'm just so thrilled by the idea. Now that I've shared my happy news, let's get witchy. The first time a woman was called a witch while wearing a tall, conical, flat-brimmed black hat in popular culture was in the early 1700s England. And while we are going to uncover all the wild history of this hat, I do want to take a moment to stress that this hat is not the same hat worn by sorcerers, magicians, and wizards. They are actually two different hats. This gender distinction is important for two very big reasons. The first being that when researching the history of witches, one is researching the history of sex and gender. You cannot discuss witches without discussing gender norms, or the gender binary. Misogyny and sexism are fundamental in the creation of the myth of witches, and it is because of the prevailing misogyny and sexism within Western culture that witches and feminism are so intertwined. The second reason is due to the connection of the sorcerer's hat to medieval anti-Semitism, which will be discussed more in depth a bit later in this video. And now I think it's a good time to add a bit of a trigger warning here. I will be addressing issues like sexuality, gender, sexism, ageism, anti-Semitism, as well as anti-Quakerism. And while I will endeavor to do my best to address these delicate topics with great care, I do want to give you all a warning. The discussion of witches is a discussion of sex, sexuality, and gender. I would be doing myself and you all a disservice to not take a minute to address how gender is going to be addressed in this video. The witches we are discussing in this video are people who were identified as female within the gender binary from the 1450s to the 1800s. The term witch in and of itself is actually a heavily gendered term to describe a female practitioner of magic. Men who practiced magic were historically referred to as sorcerers and magicians. This gendering of practitioners of magic also played into how magic was and was not accepted in medieval Europe, as sorcerers and magicians could and did hold respected positions within society, including acting as advisors to rulers and monarchs. Gender nonconformity and the rejection of patriarchal gender norms is a historic indicator of a witch. Since a woman who eschewed traditional and acceptable gender norms during her time, like working in trade, being single, and or overtly sexual in her behavior, were all indications of medieval and early modern witchcraft. As I stated in my menstruation video, sex and gender is a spectrum, and on my channel I want to create a safe and inclusive space. With that being said, when
oh my god, if I were to like be shoved back in time. Imagine if I were to vanish back in time, dressed as I am now with all of my tattoos. I would be immediately hung as a witch, for sure. I have had a couple of people legitimately like ask me if I am in fact a practicing witch. Well, one doesn't really count because she was a child and it was Halloween and I did have this witch hat on. And she asked me if I was a real witch. I was like, I guess I give out that vibe, which is excellent. But I've had a couple of other people just like literally this thing, like think that I am some kind of practitioner. I was like, no, it's happened like several times over the course of my adult life, and only one of those times was a child. So I was like, I guess I give off a vibe.
About witches pre-2000, I will be using heavily gendered language in keeping with the research and the cultural beliefs at the time. When I speak about modern witches, I will be endeavoring to use inclusive language. Additionally, I believe that the idea of a witch and calling oneself a witch is now considered more gender neutral. Finally, when I am discussing witches in this video, I am not speaking of individuals who identify with the religion of Wicca. While I assume some of my viewers here are Wiccan and that there are many Wiccan who rocks a witch's hat, the conical black witch's hat predates the religion of Wicca by over 200 years.
Wow, I did not realize that. Of the people who thought that I was a witch, of the adults who thought that I was a witch, I think at least one of them did, two of them for sure did mean Wicca, but at least one of them did not mean that.
While the iconography of the Black Witch Hat does not come into the public consciousness until the early to mid 1700s, witches were a dominating force in European culture and mythology since the mid 1400s. To understand the history of the Black Witch Hat, we first must establish what a witch was and what she looked like in Europe pre-1700. The church and the monarchs of early medieval period, pre-1100, were not interested in witches and actively tried to downplay, ignore, and speak out against the possibility of their existence. However, by the 13th century, they had completely changed their tune and were all about hunting and eradicating witches. My personal theory as to why this happened is because the church was relatively new in its control of medieval Europe and it wanted to ignore any potential connections to traditional Celtic, Norse, and other pagan beliefs. However, when that didn't seem to work, they just fully embraced that fear-mongering as an effective tool to maintain power and control over Europe. Yeah!
Yay! Church!
That's not awkward at all. The first books on witchcraft, which established many of the stereotypes we associate with witches today, were published during the last half of the 1400s with the book Malleus Maleficarum, or The Witch's Hammer, or The Hammer of Witches, depending on the translation, being held up as the witch hunters' Bibles for centuries to come. In fact, the book was so popular that 20 editions of the book were published between 1487 and 1520, and another 16 between 1574 and 1669. The book's popularity and continuous printing ensured that it was able to reach and influence much, if not all, of Europe. It was also translated into different languages and is still actually in print today. In The Witch's Hammer, which was a work sanctioned by the Pope, the two male authors, Henryk Insitor and James Sprague, established the rules on how to know when a woman was a witch.
Let's find out how we can tell at a glance if a woman is a witch. I cannot wait. Let's meet some of my people. Actually, Jess should honestly be here for this video. Like, she should really be here for this. I'm sure she would be interested. Oh well. Sorry, Jessica.
Quickly became accepted truths by society and were mirrored in popular art of the time. A great example of this is a print from circa 1500 by Albrecht Dürer that is commonly called A Witch Riding a Goat Backwards. Here he perfectly illustrates what a witch looks like in medieval Germany, which by the way was apparently the epicenter of the
having a great
witch
day.
epidemic during the late medieval period. The witch is female. According to Institors and Spraguers, witches were female. Old, because old women's spirits were inflamed with malice and rage. Gee, I wonder why. Naked. This represented witches' overt sexuality and sexual appetite. One of the biggest fears around witches was their ability to render men impotent, cutting off men's genitals and keeping them stored away in little baskets and birds' nests.
Oh, is that where the penis trees came from? I've seen a lot of imagery of penis trees. I didn't realize it had to do with witches.
Because Beanie Babies weren't a thing yet. Long wild hair. It was believed that witches' power could reside in her hair. Screaming,
like
a woman's
Samson.
voice was believed to carry magical powers. The spindle she is showing is a sign of work, that she works as a weaver, and women who worked in trades like weaving, brewing, and midwifery were more likely to be accused of witchcraft than women who did not work. The threat to the patriarchal gender norms by an independent working...
So as a bartender, I'm not a brewer, but a bartender. I think that might get me gone in some places. Sorry, like I said, we're organizing some stuff. We're figuring things out.
female was just too much for these delicate men to bear.
Rip Frank.
Side note, it is also during this time that men discovered how lucrative the weaving and brewing trades were, and they decided just to take over the industries, making it harder for unmarried women to find honest employment. This behavior was also mimicked in the late 18th century when men realized that the female-dominated millinery trade was full of financial opportunities, and they really wanted in on that piece.
No, hashtag
Next up
not
is
bitter.
flying, to show her magical abilities by doing something unnatural. Riding the flying goat backwards. The idea of things being done backwards was associated with the devil. It is also a representation of the witch's rejection of societal and gender norms. The goat also is the devil himself, as it was said that the devil would turn himself into an animal and carry the witch through the sky. If she wasn't depicted riding an animal, it was usually a pitchfork. Or something else. A little phallic-y. The witch is riding away from a hail.
Just to again prove the superiority, I suppose, like the sexuality, the superiority. People be afraid of a woman in the workplace. Some of that's still true.
Storm. In the upper left-hand corner there, witches were accused of changing the weather as well as being the scapegoats for any natural disasters, droughts, etc. This version of the witch, established in 15th century Germany, set the standard
I wish
for
I
the
could
witch
change
for
the
the
weather.
next several hundred years in Europe. You see the same iconography being used to show witches throughout continental Europe art up through the 19th century. It seems that Britain followed fairly closely to the stereotype up until the 1700s, which is when we see the iconography of the witch in Britain completely changed, resulting in the witch that Americans and Brits recognize today. The Anglo-American witch is an insular development within Great Britain, and eventually her colonies, and is not a reflection of the continental European ideas of what a witch looks like. Even today, witches in Europe look different than our pointy hat flying magic queen. In Sweden, witches come out around Easter to ask for candy, and they are just the cutest damn things.
Look how
their
cute.
Little brightly colored headscarves and their little rosy cheekings, and then they have them little freckles and they're just cute.
That is cute.
So cute.
And the tea kettle.
Also,
I like how there's the tea kettle and she went as high pitched as that tea kettle was going.
Swedish witches are definitely cottagecore witches, and I am here for that. Oh, cottagecore Swedish witches. Oh, I love it. Oh, so good. Okay, moving.
All right, back to it, please. Let's go. I'm here to learn about hats.
Now that we've established what defines a witch in medieval and early modern Europe, it's now time to discuss where the hat actually comes from. There are two popular theories and one old, less popular one, i.e. it's not on BuzzFeed or Vice yet. None of the theories I'm going to address. While I think all theories presented are related to the broader discussion of the history of witches, only one of them actually makes sense when it comes to tracing the history of the black, conical, flat-brimmed hat. The first theory, which has been shared quite a bit recently, is that the black conical hat comes from anti-Semitic sumptuary laws in medieval Germany. The connection between witches and anti-Semitism is a historical fact. As you can easily see the rise of anti-Semitism and witch mania happening at the same time in medieval German history. Jewish people and witches were often accused of the same quote-unquote crimes and behaviors, including, but not limited to, heresy. The subject is well researched and well written about, and I have a couple of articles about it actually in my description below. However, I do not agree with the idea that the flat-brimmed conical witch hat is a part of that particular side of witch history, and here's why. Naomi Lubrick wrote an incredible article called The Wandering Hat: Iterations of the Medieval Jewish Pointed Cap, where she traces the history of the pointed Jewish cap from ancient history up through the medieval period. In this article, she explains how the style of cap went from being a trend amongst the fashionable set in Europe, a point of sartorial pride for Jewish men, to being used as a tool to other and shame Jewish men, criminals, and Christian women who were convicted of having sex with Jewish men. In the article, Lubrick points out that Jewish men took particular pride in wearing their pointed caps and other hats in the early medieval Europe, citing a 12th century French rabbi who called the hats worn by the men in his congregation ostentatious. This hat was worn voluntarily by Jewish men up through the 13th century. By the end of the 1200s and early 1300s, the hat that was once a display of Jewish pride is now being used as a tool of othering and oppression due to a variety of reasons, including the onset of the Crusades. If I was to hazard a guess as to why this happened, I would wager that it had a lot to do with fear of anything and anyone who isn't a devout Christian male. However, throughout Lubrick's entire paper, she never once specifies that this pointed style cap was worn by Jewish women. In fact, the only reference she made to a woman wearing this cap was when a Christian woman was accused of having sex with a Jewish man.
Oh, and then she had to wear one
as a punishment. Additionally, the style of hat itself varies throughout countries and regions, and Jewish men were required to wear different styles in those different regions. And they were fined or jailed if they did not comply with the specific hat style.
Dang!
The variety of hats also makes it difficult to draw any sort of direct connection to the flat-brimmed, tall, conical witch's hat. This hat also was not standard throughout all of Europe. When the Fourth Lateran Council decreed in 1215 that Jewish people in all Christian countries be visibly distinguished from non-Jews, England decided that a badge was to be worn and not a hat. This legislative difference is crucial. The black witch's hat is an English invention and not a continental European one. European witches are not depicted wearing a pointed hat or cap in period art and imagery. However, sorcerers and magicians, both of which are understood to be males, are depicted wearing a tall, soft, pointed cap. Since England did not establish...
So something I was noticing about that, she's mentioned that the males, the sorcerers or whatever, wore the tall pointed cap. And I have been watching Over the Garden Wall, and I noticed that Wirt is wearing one of those like tall pointed hats with no brim or anything. And I'm wondering, is that supposed to indicate something kind of with like a sorcery ye with him. I don't know. Anyway, I'm drawing a parallel. I've connected the dots.
Established a hat as a marker of Judaism, it is fair to assume that English people would not have associated a tall pointed hat to the Jewish faith like Germans or Italians would have. This sartorial difference is further emphasized by the passing of time. The iconography of the modern Anglo-American witch began in the 1700s, 500 years after those anti-Semitic laws were passed. To compare, we, right now, are closer to the foundation of the United States of America as a country than 1700s England was to the Fourth Lateran Council. With all that being said,
I don't know what that means. I don't remember what that is.
Trace the connections of the pointed cap to sorcerers and court jesters. This gender distinction is important.
Okay.
The hats worn by witches and sorcerers are not the same. They are a heavily gendered garment that were also created at different points in history. While there is plenty of evidence to connect anti-Semitism to the myths and stereotypes of medieval witches, described by Incitores and Sprague, I do not believe that the black conical hat associated with witches in Britain and the United States is one of them. However, with that being said, there is evidence to connect the soft pointed hat of the sorcerer and magician to this anti-Semitic practice pointed out by Lubrecht. And while one might wish to argue that I'm splitting hairs with my conclusion, seeing as how male magicians and sorcerers were treated with a lot more respect and dignity in medieval Europe than their female counterparts, I would argue that this is a valid differentiation.
Sure, I can see where that's coming from.
The next theory, which is 100% crackpot, is that British alewives were the inspiration for the modern witch.
Man, that was the one I'd heard of. And she tells me I'm crackpot. She called me out immediately. Damn, well, she calls me out 16 minutes after I said it, but still.
The articles I found perpetuating this clickbaity nonsense cited no sources and were just crappy regurgitations of someone else's shoddy research.
Man.
Yeah, that's right. I just threw down in academic speak.
She called me out. She got me.
These make me want to bash my head into a wall type of articles. The main image used to back up their Natty Ice quality level claim is a print from a book from the late 1600s titled "Remarkable Person."
She's coming with Natty Light. She's coming for Natty Light too. What did the hashtag
used
say?
To back up their Natty Ice quality.
Obscure college. It's not an obscure college reference. That's no way. That's not obscure. How's that obscure? That's an easy college reference. That's a low-hanging fruit of a college reference.
Quality level claim is a print from a book from the late 1600s titled "Remarkable Persons from the Reign of Edward III to the Revolution." Here we are introduced to Mother Louse, the owner of a notoriously filthy inn in Oxfordshire.
Because Louse.
Notably, she is also apparently the last woman in England to wear a ruff. Just FYI. While the image and depiction of Mother Louse are clearly satirical when taken within its historical context.
3 lice passing. Lots of lice in her bar. Lousy, I guess.
Shitty internet researchers and writers, desperate attempts to link her to witchcraft are a result of their gross misunderstanding of dress history during the 17th century. While I do not expect people to be experts in 17th century women's dress, when you play in the dress history sandbox, you should at least be able to have a basic understanding of the subject and time period. It's not that hard. According to the book, Mother Louse was an old woman by the late 17th century, and as such, she is dressed in the outdated fashions of her youth, thus indicated by her large ruff and arguably her wide-brimmed conical hat. The brewing of ale was a female-dominated trade pre-1460, when, like weaving, men decided to take it over because of the financial lucrative possibilities. Because the women who worked as alewives were able to earn an independent living, they, like weavers and midwives, were also more susceptible to accusations of witchcraft. However, the dress and style of Mother Louse is not indicative of an alewife, but is simply that of an older woman who is hilariously out of style.
Aw, poor lady.
At the very end of the 16th century, we see a fashion for tall, conical, flat-brimmed hats for women, such as this fabulous one worn by Esther Inglis. The trend for the tall, black, wool felt hats lasted through most of the 1600s, with small adjustments in the shape and height of the crown. Women of all levels of society wore the style of hat as it was considered normal fashion for the time.
And I guess people wore hats a lot more back then too, because it meant you didn't have to wash your hair as often. That's something that I also heard, and I hope that one's not false.
It's not until the end of the 1600s that this style of hat becomes associated with Quaker women. Side note, I think we can all agree that Miss Salisbury over here is looking particularly fetching in her notably conical hat. Work! During the mid-17th century, the exact same moment in time when the tall, conical, flat-brimmed black hat for women had reached its peak of popularity, we see the founding of the Christian denomination known as the Religious Society of Friends, or what a lot of us today would know as Quaker, which, by the way, if you're not already familiar with or aware of, it is still actually a thriving community today. As it turns out, Quakerism and people who identified as Quakers scared the ever-loving crap out of the rest of Britain. They were considered direct threats to long-instituted status quos, societal and gender norms, and as a result were met with hostility and...
Yeah, they believed in things like equality. What? Oh no. Equality? For everybody, or at the very least, you know, like in America, they were staunch abolitionists. Women, I think, were allowed to have actual speaking roles in the society and the government. Like, they actually practiced what they preached, which for Christians, especially of that time, and possibly, I don't know. I mean, I feel like for Christians of that time, it would have been a big deal.
Suspicion from other Brits.
Dangerous.
Hostility towards and suspicions of Quakers, especially Quaker women, resulted in physical aggressions, arrests, rumors, speculations, and a concerted effort by non-Quakers to destroy the religious movement.
So also from what I understand, like Puritans and Quakers, not the same, by the way. They're different. They dressed similar, but they were different sects, from my understanding of it all.
So much so that there is even legitimate speculation that one of the reasons behind the reinstating of the Stuart monarchy in England was to combat the quote-unquote threat of Quakerism and to
those
go back
pacifists,
to the good old
they're
days.
so dangerous.
In Barry Ray's article, Popular Hostility Towards Quakers in Mid-17th Century England, he outlines the various rumors and speculations associated with Quakers, and curiously, they mirror the same accusations and complaints the Western medieval world had about witches, breaking of gender norms. Some of the earliest Quaker ministers were women, putting
ministers,
power and holy authority, which directly conflicts with the Church of England.
So not necessarily I was thinking more like a council person. Minister makes sense with this religious order.
Women were not allowed to be ordained in the Church of England until the 1990s.
Dang! What?
Quaker women were notoriously independent and very vocal within their church and communities. A well-known Quaker woman, Anne Blakeling, was described by a non-Quaker female contemporary as no woman but a man. I mean, can we get more anti-gender norms than that? Breaking away from traditional social hierarchies, Quakers didn't believe in paying tithes, which directly threatened the long-established income streams for the church. Additionally, Charles II stated that Quakers were quote-unquote inconsistent with any kind of government, meaning that Quakers were viewed as a direct threat to the monarchy. This tension between Quakers and the monarchy is mirrored in the perceived threat of witches, which were also viewed as a threat to monarchies as well as the church. To threaten the church or the monarchy is to threaten the patriarchy, which was considered a part of being a witch. Heresy. Their religious beliefs established them as heretics in 17th century England. Quakers minimized the importance of a historic Christ and emphasized the personal spirit above scripture. They also reject the traditional Orthodox ideas of heaven and hell. How deliciously radical is that? Sexuality. Quakers were accused of being incredibly sexually promiscuous and to be perverted sex fiends. The Ballad of the Four-Legged Quaker and the accompanying illustration are about how a Quaker man has sex with a horse to create a half horse and half man, and I can't believe I'm sharing this with you guys. That final figure, though, and on the right, is a devil wearing a Quaker man's hat, clearly associating them with Satan's sin. Quaker women in the early 1700s were accused and often portrayed in pop culture as prostitutes and adulteresses. It is generally accepted from the mid-1600s to the early 1700s that Quakers were really, really into some good-ass sexy time. They were also...
It's really interesting to hear this stuff because I remembered there being reasons that the Quakers left England and came to America. There was a really, really strong, Quaker population in the Northeast. I'm just double checking right now if Quakers were the same as Puritans. Okay, yeah, they were different. They were in conflict with each other. Okay, I thought so. I was like, because I was like, the Puritans are what, like, they were like the Pilgrims, right? So like they are the ones who got who everyone just like associates with like the founding of America. But Quakers were here pretty early on too, but like the Puritans were crap. they were messy. Quakers good, Puritans bad. There we go.
Just accused of being witches, just in general. Founder George Fox was suspected of being a sorcerer, turning people into Quakers by touching their foreheads and using magic. Quaker women
or maybe just like they liked his what he was telling them, which was a lot more accessible and like less church is going to steal all your money from you so you can get into heaven maybe. Like maybe they just liked his message. Yes, magic.
Also regularly accused of witchcraft throughout the mid-1660s. And just like witches, Quakers were accused of causing bad weather. Additionally, in the beginning, they held their meetings in secluded outdoor locations as well as in houses, which directly mirrors how witches' Sabbaths are portrayed in European art. Their trembling and shaking during these meetings mimicked the fits of those who were attacked by witches or were associated with the devil himself. Finally, their use of language, dress, and general social behaviors casted Quakers as outsiders amongst the British populace. Looking at this mountain of evidence, it is easy to see how the British public began to take the idea of the witch and the Quaker woman and began to kind of smash them into one. Okay. It is now time to illustrate how the vilified Quaker woman morphed into our modern idea of the witch. We've established that Quaker women received the brunt of the anger and hostility in late 17th century and early 18th century England. The hate directed towards Quaker women was so common that we see a boom of satirical prints mocking Quaker women, and in these images, the Quaker women are always dressed the same. Black dress, white neck handkerchief, apron, and a tall, flat-brimmed black conical hat. For example, in this circa 1660s print, a female Quaker is speaking to what we can assume is the public, because we, as the viewer of this print, are the public, about the strength of her quote-unquote light to prevail against Satan. Behind her is Satan, also speaking in rhyme, with his hand on her shoulder, indicating a certain level of intimacy. Below is the warning for the public, arguably a warning for women. With a face of brass, this woman that you see, most impudently doth affirm that she, the mind of God in all points more doth know, than from the sacred scriptures air could flow. Presumptuous wretch, it were fit that she at home should keep and mind her housewifery. And if no means to live on work for bread, then idly gossip with her inagate head. Their light within doth so prevail, it makes them hot about the lail. Except a friend that point doth clear, they could themselves in pieces tear. Outside the obvious direct visual connections to female Quakers and their relationship to the devil, the inscription below is deeply rooted in the strict misogynistic gender norms of the mid to late 17th century. That this woman has no business being out and about in public, being loud with independent thoughts and feelings.
How dare she?
For her own safety, and yours, she needs to go back home and go back to her housewifery, or at least conduct some sort of honest work instead of spreading quote-unquote idle gossip. Again, let me remind you that the power of the female voice is directly related to medieval and early modern beliefs on witchcraft. I would argue that if you were to view this print through the lens of the 17th century British culture, which has had several hundred years of church-sanctioned, monarch-approved stereotypes about witches, it would be only natural to view this Quaker woman wearing her tall, conical, flat-brimmed black hat similar to that of a witch. By the end of the 17th century, we are witnessing a shift in popular fashion for women. No longer wearing feminized versions of doublets made by tailors, no. Fashionable English women are wearing mantuas and fontages. In this 1698 print of a London Quaker meeting, we can see the non-Quaker men and women in the lower left corner, witnessing a Quaker woman preaching. One woman has her back to us, but the other is in profile with her hand over her chest and her mouth open in what can be interpreted as a universal gesture of shock and awe. Obviously, the shock is supposed to be coming from witnessing the Quaker woman breaking gender roles. While the group
She's a little into it, I
help tell
think.
the story of the print, the main character is the Quaker woman who takes center stage in this image. She is instantly recognizable for what she is, a scary, independent, gender non-conforming woman in a tall, black, conical, flat-brimmed hat. Furthermore, we can see that none of the Quakers, male or female, match their contemporaries in fashion. They are all instead dressed in dark and old-fashioned clothes, though you will notice that there is no ruff to be found a la Mother Louse. The Quaker women in this image are basically 50 years out of date with their clothing. They are instantly recognizable to the general public as Quaker women in this style of dress. The idea of Quaker dress is so universally acknowledged at this point in history that we see references to it in plays featuring Quaker women. Actors and actresses had to provide their own costumes for plays, and so an actress working in the early 18th century would have known what Quaker dress is and had it made up, hat included. To further emphasize how rooted the imagery of a Quaker woman was to popular consciousness, let's take a look at Hogarth's A Harlot Progress, Plate 3. In this image, we see our main character, a prostitute, finally waking up for breakfast at 12:15.
Nice.
Next to her bed, on the left side of the image, is a black, flat-brimmed, pointed hat next to some birch sticks. Barry Wind argues in his article, Hogarth's Fruitful Invention, Observations on Harlot's Progress, Plate 3, that the hat on the wall is supposed to represent a Quaker woman's hat, which is to be interpreted as a symbol of sexual promiscuity and the harlot's extreme sexual appetite. On the other hand, one could argue that in this case the hat is also a witch's hat, because by this time we have at least one 18th century publication depicting a witch wearing a tall, conical, flat-brimmed black hat. The book, The History of Witches and Wizards, giving a true account of all their trials in England, Scotland, Sweden, France, and New England with their confessions and condemnation, was published in 1720.
That's a crazy title.
What I have been able to identify.
I wish we still kind of did titles like that, honestly, sometimes. I think it's fun. Like, Birds of Prey, The Emancipation of Harley Quinn kind of did. That was like a fun movie reference to something like that. I kind of think it's fun, like in these old-fashioned books, that the title like takes up the entire the entire page of a, like, the entire cover. Just like, come on. Give us more. Like Fall Out Boy did it with their songs a lot, and it's like, let's go. Let's improve the ridiculousness of what things are called. I think it would be funny.
So far as the first image that directly identifies a woman wearing a black conical hat as a witch. The first story in the book is about the trial of convicted wizard Julian Cox.
Are you okay, hun?
On page 6, we see a woodblock print of a witch, devil, and sorcerer flying on.
I mean, maybe it depends on how he spelled it. Because, like, I knew people, the last name was Cox, like, growing up. And it's like, I don't know. It never occurred to me to think that was funny.
Brooms harassing a victim. The witch is clearly shown wearing a flat-brimmed, tall, conical hat. And while the story takes place in the 1660s, we must remember that in the 1720s, when this book was published, British society was still deeply anti-Quaker, and contemporary prints about Quakers would depict Quaker women in the same exact fashion, including, but not limited to, the frontispiece of The Quaker's Art of Courtship from 1710, showing several Quaker women in the tall, conical hats. Between Ray's long list of witchy things that Quakers were accused of, as well as Quaker women bearing the brunt of anti-Quakerism, it is entirely logical that early 18th century readers of the book would associate the witch with a Quakeress. Obviously, this terrible publicity for the Quaker faith was becoming increasingly problematic, and the narrative around Quakers needed to change. While I haven't been able to narrow it down to an exact date or the exact cause of this sartorial upgrade, though it seems highly likely witches had something to do with it, there was definitely a massive shift in public perception of Quaker women by the 1750s. So somewhere between the 1720s and the 1750s, we see a change in imagery surrounding the Quaker woman. A new ideal of the Quaker woman is presented, and is one that most historians would recognize today. This print of the quote-unquote new Quaker woman is the perfect example.
Fancy.
In the 1750s print entitled The Fair Quaker, we see an entirely new version of the Quaker lady. She is beautiful, she is demure in her posture, and her mouth is closed. Very different from the early images of Quaker women wailing and flailing. She is dressed in clothing that was fashionable for the 1750s, and the only thing that really distinguishes her as a Quaker is a small black hood worn over her cap. The inscription describes her as, "Nor gold nor gems are wanting to the maid, in neat simplicity like this arrayed. Plain native beauty more delights the heart than all the glittering ornaments of art. Before moving on, let's just all take a collective second to give the PR team that handled this public perception of Quakers a massive round of applause for handling this public relations and marketing nightmare. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, they did good. She did not round. You have to round it.
It is also by the 1750s.
This lady has made so many silly puns. I cannot believe she didn't round of applause.
That we see the modern image of the witch solidify itself within British popular culture. Throughout the rest of the 18th century, prints
she's
and
sitting on the
images
moon.
depicting witches flying on brooms explode in popularity. Coincidentally, the shift in perception of the witch as an actual threat to public safety, to a cute fairy story and a source of comedy, correlates beautifully with the broader cultural shifts of 18th century Great Britain that result in the era that we now refer to as the Enlightenment, which gave more emphasis on scientific thought, less emphasis on the church, more equality between the sexes, an increase of rights, and eventually a lot of democracy by way of revolutions. If I'm being perfectly honest, I usually like to describe the last quarter of the 18th century as a time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. By the mid-19th century, the image of the English witch was used for representations both good and bad magic, as illustrated in this title page of a book of fairy tales from 1849.
Cool.
In it, we see that in the lower right-hand corner two quote-unquote witches. The first being Cinderella's fairy godmother, a universally acknowledged bringer of good and wonderful things, and Mother Goose, who is the sweet older lady that these stories come from.
I had no idea Mother Goose was based on a witch. Also, I never considered Cinderella's godmother to be a witch. That's so cool. Okay, I just kind of was like, oh, she's a magic creature. And then Mother Goose, I was like, I don't know. I never even considered it. Mother Goose is a witch.
From there on, the idea of witches and Halloween continued to grow in popular culture and popularity, from antique holiday postcards depicting witches wearing their hats and flying on brooms, The Wizard of Oz and Wicked, to where we are today with the rise of witchcore, witch talk, and the witch hat becoming an icon of feminism, embracing one's own magical feminine energy, independence, and a rejection of the patriarchy and gender norms. While I think it might be easy to be wary of the hat for fear of it being anti-Quaker, I would offer a different interpretation. Female Quakers of the 17th century were clearly brave and empowered women who were not afraid to stand up for what they believed in. They spoke their minds, fought against oppressive gender norms, and were early fighters for female equality, even if they weren't doing so consciously. The hat that Quaker women wore, once just an everyday hat that became associated with Quakers and witches, is representative of power, both their inner power as well as their power over British society. To wear a witch hat today is in part a celebration of the brave Quaker women who helped fight for gender equality, as well as
did not anticipate that.
Number of women accused of witchcraft who were murdered, arrested, and ostracized from their communities just for being different. And by wearing a witch hat, you demonstrate that you are someone who identifies with what it means to be a witch. This can mean many different things, from being a practitioner of magic, Wiccan, pagan, or even anti-religion, to someone who believes in gender equality, freedom of sexual expression, independence, and embracing one's inner self.
Sure. I guess then, in that case, I'll continue wearing the hat.
And with that, my beautiful friends, I believe it is time to conclude this dress history lecture. I hope that you all enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed researching it and making it. I want to give a quick thank you to Kenna Liebes, Bernadette Banner, and Andrew Apple for being my proofreaders and argument nitpickers. I so appreciated your all's help on this video so much. If you all like this kind of content, please feel free to subscribe, because I love actually making these kinds of videos, and I'm already planning quite a few more. And with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you all back here next Sunday with a new video, and I hope you'll have a good one. Wait, I think I'm missing something. Now it's time to go.
Okay, that's the hat. Oh, okay. It's because her last name is Cox. I thought that she was making like a dirty joke or something. My point is, I was like, why is she like being silly about it? All right, it was because her last name. I understand now. I forgot that she had a last name. Oh, wait, there's more. Oh, but wait, there's more.
Is a staple in our
Oh, cat!
Bye.
Okay, lots of fun, what is the word? Bloopers, lots of bloopers. We don't really do bloopers here very often. Occasionally I do, but it's always a secret what videos have a blooper, which is why it's fun. I have fun with them sometimes. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I did enjoy learning about the historical origins of the witch's hat. She did call me out. I was wrong about some stuff. All right, that was interesting. I hope you found it interesting as well, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.